Good afternoon. Thank you, Robert, for having me here. It's also a pleasure to speak after this panel that has very interesting things to say on Himachal. And in fact, I'm going to draw from something that almost every panelist who's spoken before me has said. In fact, I'm going to look at the agrarian idealism and the reality of agriculture. I'm going to look at the large development projects and also at the tremendous migration into Himachal. I'm going to look at various types of migration, of which, of course, in-migration is one of the largest. What I'm also going to try to do, though, is to tie this up with another set of literature, or a very different way in which Himachal has been looked at. If you're aware of the sort of the conservation ecology side of things and the way Himachal is looked at, there's a lot of talk about the carbon sinks in Himachal. There's a whole discourse around the black carbon emission and how Himachal, in fact, is the state that's going to get us carbon credits. So there's a sort of environmentalist discourse that's also very, very prominent, in which Himachal plays this kind of ideal role. So I'm going to kind of draw from my fieldwork, but saying pretty much the same things that the three panelists before me have said, but I'm going to try and link it up to this whole discourse around climate change, but also around a much older sort of discourse that's prevalent all over India, this idea of community-based resource management. I'm not going to speak against it, but I'm going to point out that what we think of as rural and rural community has fundamentally transformed. So that's why I'm using the term rurality here, because this distinction between rural and urban, in terms of any of the sort of sociology, if you've done classic sociology and you have a definition of what is rural, none of them would actually work precisely in any of these villages, right? And I don't think Himachal is an exception, but it is different from others, and so that's what I'm going to talk about in this presentation today. Okay, so mobile mountains, I think the mountain regions of South Asia, in fact around the world, but I'm going to focus on South Asia, have actually been extremely mobile. It's not really a new phenomenon, although that's one of the least noticed things about the mountains itself. In fact, much earlier, we're talking about the 80s, there are studies that show that there's large male migration from mountain regions in the Himalayan region, right, all over South Asia. And of course, if you look at the population in India in general, also migration. This is the general slide, so I'm talking about how migration in general in India is very, very high. 30% of Indians are in fact moving from their place of residence. If you look at the mountainous regions, 40% of adult males are in fact migrant. What you're saying is that when you talk of a village in any of these regions, you're really talking about 40% of people you think of as belonging to that rural community, not living there for most of the year. Of course, feminization of agriculture all over India, something that's being spoken about, but also in the mountain regions. And if you look at the Himalayan states, look at the percentage of migrants that have been recorded in each of these states. I want to point out in Himachal Pradesh here, it's one of the highest percentages of migrants in the state. If you look at absolute numbers, as Rohit had mentioned in the initial note, it's a small state. So if you're talking about absolute number of migrants, it's not really that remarkable. But what you need to understand is that the migrants in the state as a proportion of the population that exists there is in fact the highest in India. Okay, that is the latest census, the 2011 census, but what I want you to notice, of course, that if you look at absolute numbers, Himachal doesn't figure anywhere, it's a small state. So, but if you actually look at as a percentage of the state's population, what you find is Himachal is in fact the state with the highest number of migrants. What is also remarkable about the 2011 census, which I'm going to talk about the specific period between the 90s and the 2000s, is the fact that for the first time Himachal has shown more out-migration than in-migration. So Himachal in that sense is unique, not unlike the first slide that I showed you, unlike Nepal and Uttarakhand. Himachal is traditionally a state that has not had out-migration. It has better development indicators, better social development indicators. It has had people from all over India, central India in particular, and Nepal actually come into the state. But for the first time in the last decade, what we also see is that people of the state have also moved out. So the negative migration is actually found only in the last decade. So this is the kind of migration we're actually seeing in Himachal. So as I mentioned, it's traditionally a low out migration state. It's very high in migration. I'll show you some of that as we move along. have very few numbers about is actually intrastate migration. I'll talk about the development trajectory that the state has taken. We've spoken about how the social indicators are great, but one of the things you find is that within Himachal itself, there is uneven development, and there's tremendous movement of people within the state. What is happening, in fact, is centralized development. There are centers of development where you find people from other districts are moving in. I'm in fact located in one of the districts that has that centralized development. It has tourism, it has benefited tremendously from tourism, it has benefited in whatever sense from hydropower projects and also from commercial agriculture. So unlike the districts that you've looked at, it actually has been successful. It is a success story in all of these. So I'm going to be looking at Kulu district. The other, of course, migration that's often, again, we don't have overall numbers about, but I'll talk about my district and the particular villages, is actually temporary accumulative and amenity migration. I'll tell you what these are. Temporary, of course, I'm not talking about the daily migration, from the village to the city, but really the fact that large numbers of people are actually migrating to study and to work elsewhere for short periods of time. So in some sense, their hometown or their home village is still that, and that is how it's identified in all government records, but they're actually not in the village. So there is tremendous temporary migration, particularly for education in the district that I'm looking at. Accumulative migration, I think, is a very important aspect that we need to recognize. Even in the general debates on migration in India, one of the aspects that's rightfully talked about more is distress migration, where your poorest, like in Jharkhand, in your case, the poorest, in fact, because of lack of development, are moving out. What we find in Himachal is actually the reverse, particularly in districts like Kulu. That surplus that is generated from successful commercial agriculture is actually being invested in sending some family members outside. So in terms of census, they are still residents, they're still the village community, but what you find is young men and women, in fact, increasingly, are actually being sent out, both for school and higher education, but also, as I think you're all aware, once you talk of higher education, you're talking about white-collar jobs, which are fewer in number in the region itself. So we're talking about accumulative migration and amenity migration. Amenity migration is also migration for what is seen as a better lifestyle. That, of course, happens with movement to urban centers, also from rural areas. But one of the ones I'll talk about is an intrastate migration. For instance, Kulu district that I'm going to talk about has a lot of migrants from the neighboring district, which is Lahore. Lahore is a high mountain desert, and there again, agriculture, commercial agriculture has been successful since the 60s, late 60s, 70s. So what you have is actually a lot of people from there buying land and becoming part of the settled community of Kulu. And so this 2001 census clearly shows out-migration from the state also is increasing. The reason I'm pointing all of this out, the way I want to connect it to the idea of ecology, is the fact that when we talk about community-based natural resource management, or when we talk about climate change adaptation and resilience and things like that, there's often an imagination of a stable and homogeneous community. It may not be homogeneous in terms of caste and gender and things like that, but you assume that the community that was there last year is also going to be the community this year, and I'm going to show you that that's not the case in any of my villages. Yeah. Okay, so Kulu district, I'm sorry I didn't put up a map of Himachal. I assumed it's a panel on Himachal, and so there would be maps before me. But it's a district at 1,000 to 6,000 meter altitude, very good temperate forests. It's one of the carbon sinks that India can boast of. So it is really ecologically very significant and spoken about. According to the census, it's also 90% rural, with only 7% irrigated agriculture. So we're really talking about rainfall agriculture. But what we also find that in the last decade alone, the primary sector has decreased by 5.2%. So agriculture and its contribution is really decreasing, and this is just the last decade. It's been continuously decreasing, but there's been a sharp decline just in the last decade. If you look at where the general prosperity of the region, if you look at the district level data, if you want to look at the state level also is true, but I'll speak about Kulu. The development options that have really contributed to the success story are horticulture and cash crops. If it's not horticulture, there's off-season vegetables, which are very successful in the region. So there is increase in household income. There's tourism that is centered around Manali in Kulu district. But of of course, if you look at tourism in Himachal in general, it's extremely centralized. About 50% of the tourism is really in 3 districts of Himachal. Yeah? So it's Kangra, Shimla, and Kullu. But even within the district, there are really these centers where most of the tourists go to. Yeah, and the third, of course, is hydroelectric power. What I'm going to do through the rest of the presentation, during the next 10 minutes, is show you how each of these options inherently requires people to move. It expects large amounts of labor will come in. If you're building a hydroelectric plant, you need thousands of basic level unskilled and skilled workers to come into the region. So each of these, in that sense, is going to require that migration, and yet that migration is not taken into account either in our larger development models, but more specifically, they're really unaccounted in terms of what is happening to the local forest, what is happening to the water system, or in general, when we're thinking of community-based resource management or dealing with broader change. But I'm basing my overall argument, of course, I think I'm one of the few people in this room who's old enough to have gone back to my PhD villages, but that's what I've done. I did my PhD in some of these villages in Kullu district in the 90s, the mid-90s, and the last year I've had the chance to go back. So what I'm going to present now is really show you some of the snippets from what I've seen as change in these villages. And of course, the broader state census data. Okay. That's kind of Kullu district that I'm talking about. What I had done in '94 was I was really looking at ecological, forest use in particular. So my villages, the way they were sampled was one with a peri-urban that's close to Manali. It was still a village. The other was in fact in a tributary of the Bias River. So it was fairly interior. At that point in time, there was very little road connection. Even in 2014, the road actually doesn't reach out to the village. So it's still an interior village. But I'll show you even there, the brutality is something that we have to really look at carefully, because the idea of aspiration and the idea of the connection of the village to the urban is not really as remote. It is simply remote in terms of not having a road, a metal road reaching out to every house in the village. Yes? Okay, so one of the things that we need to understand in migration, when we talk about migration, is that the mobility we're talking about is not only of people. Of course it is of people, but it is also of materials and of culture. Yeah. So one of the things that's most ubiquitous in villages in this entire region is, of course, the cell phone. Yeah. So connectivity in terms of having a cell phone, it's almost every household would have a cell phone. Similarly, satellite television. And the third, of course, roads, but whether roads are there or not, there are other kinds of materials such as house construction material, but also automobiles that are ubiquitous in the villages. Of course, as you would expect, more in the peri-urban than in the interior. But these are not things that are rare in any of these villages. Okay, just to show you an alternative, the other village that I showed you was a peri-urban village where you do find automobiles not used as much, but definitely standing in the village. The other, of course, is an interior village where the metal road doesn't reach. The fact that the metal road doesn't reach does not mean that people in the village do not have own automobiles. What in fact is common is often that people, villagers who are better off in that interior village do end up having residences along the roadside and also vehicles. So that's also something that is important to look at. Okay, if you look at development options, in one sense, it's hard to talk about these things in black and white of whether it's a success or a failure. Because if you look at household incomes across the belt have increased. So if you ask people if they have done better in 20 years, they have. In most material terms, in terms of household income, in terms of having more secure employment, in having secure houses, in terms of education, in terms of health, in terms of all of these indicators. But we're also going to look at what else that development has done. And what you see in the picture, of course, in the background is Manali, which is your tourism, and the foreground is horticulture, the apple trees. Okay, one of the things, again, that's most ubiquitous, I think really something that Harry mentioned, that what you have in villages is actually farmers, many farmers who do not cultivate. They are farmers, it's still a culturally significant occupation. If you ask people what they do for a living, it is agriculture. So if you're just an interviewer, and again, it's a methodology question. If you're actually going there and asking people what do you do, it's agriculture, and they're farmers. Everybody's a farmer, or most people are farmers. And yet, if you actually look both at the household level data as well as the state or the district level data, is about a hectare or so. And a hectare or so is not very much in a very mountainous region where any part of the land, well, not in Kangra, but at least in the districts I'm working in, are not utilizable. Household income has diversified in both the villages, including the interior village that does not have a road that reaches it. There really is no household in either of these villages. I actually have a few more. I'm still analyzing the data, so I'm not bringing those in. But in neither of these villages is household income dependent only on agriculture, horticulture, and pastoralism. Right? And if it's a village that's near the urban center, the economy is very closely linked to the town of Manali and to tourism. And yeah, so cash crops and horticulture, even the income that is coming from agriculture is really coming from cash crops and horticulture. In both the villages, traditional crops have disappeared. I don't mean they're not, they're rare or they're somewhere, they actually disappeared. So there are grains like kodra, sajara, and things like that. And I'm mentioning this because in the mid-90s, there were households that still had those. But even other crops like rice, they're no longer viable because the rice you get in PTS is much better and much better in whatever sense, but also much cheaper than the ones you actually cultivate after so much labor. But the most important thing, as Harry mentioned, is simply the fact that there isn't enough labor to cultivate those crops. So the crops you're cultivating are really ones that bring you high returns. And horticulture, of course, apple trees occupy the rice fields there in the mid-90s. Livestock across the board have declined. Again, one of the main reasons for livestock decline is really a reason that people give is the fact that household labor is no longer available. Women are exclusively responsible for managing cattle. So for instance, in mid-1990s, at least in the interior village and in almost 80% of the peri-urban village, nobody would buy milk for the household. But now milk is clearly a commercial traded commodity. There are few households that keep cattle and they are actually selling it to the rest of the village. So, so the livestock decline again has really direct connection with the fact that female labor is no longer available. It's not productive to invest it in livestock management. Okay, so shrinking farm sizes, given that it's cash crop, horticulture, it's becoming more capital intensive. It's clearly pesticide and insecticide dependent. Yeah, okay. And the other important thing that I wanted to mention, it has very low capacity to absorb skilled labor. Right? Apart from the fact that there's very little land, it's being fragmented, it's also that once you have a population that has education, that has higher education, horticulture really is not able to absorb any kind of skilled labor. The same thing with pastoralism. Once you have educated and skilled labor, Himachal is one of those states which has 100% literacy and definitely moving towards high levels of education. This sector does not provide, does not have the ability to absorb any of the, even if people come back to Himachal Pradesh. The commercial agriculture, of course, requires in-migration. A lot of the crops, in fact, at harvest season as well as in spraying season, actually is dependent on migrant labor. So the migrant labor are not coming only for road construction, they're also coming for the apple crops, for the peas and the other vegetables that are there. Okay. I also want to mention this, the fact that fuel and fodder also now is partly collected, is partly brought in by hired labor. This is again has significance for the community-based resource management issue because there's an imagination that people who use their local forests also have embodied knowledge. They have more knowledge about the local forest because they're in connection with it, they're bringing it in. This is not the case in any of my villages here. They're still using the forest, but the use is through hired labor, not through the use of their own labor. Again, tourist economy has transformed the village near Manali. Cars, trucks that are used primarily as taxis. Every 1 to 4 houses has them. There are shops, small trade has replaced agriculture as an important household income generator. And rental income, I think again already mentioned the fact that when tourists come in, places to stay. So rental income is an important aspect of household income. In fact, in some cases, that's higher than the income coming from agriculture in the peri-urban villages. Okay, so this I've already mentioned, the fact that tourism tends to be centralized. There's very heavy migration in the season. I'm not just talking about tourists. At least there are estimates of the number of tourists that come in, but there are no estimates of the number of people who come in to service the tourists. because you have large labor in migration to provide all the services for the tourists during those 3-4 months. Okay, hydropower projects, again something that the large-scale ecological damages have been spoken about. The tunneling, of course, in one of the villages, the interior villages that I showed, there's a tunnel that goes right under the village. And one of the things that's done is that there are about a dozen local water sources that were being used in the mid-90s, and they're even till the late 90s. But now not one of them is existent. So there are, surface water actually dries up when there is tunneling under the mountain. Of course, I don't have hydrological evidence of that, but clearly seen in this village and in several others in the region. Okay. Let me briefly talk about this. Again, hydropower projects, what happens with large-scale hydropower projects is there's a construction phase of the project that usually lasts about 5-6 years. That is a phase in which you need very large numbers of workers. So this, for instance, in Sanj, this is a picture of Sanj, in fact, one of the major hydro projects in the region. This is all really quarters that were built for the people who come into the construction phase. So for 5 years, you have several thousand, tens of thousands of people coming into a very small ecological region, right? And if you look at the impacts of that on local forests, something like the Parvati project report talks about how it provides fuel to the workers, so they don't have to depend on the forest. But when they talk about providing fuel, they talk about providing a few liters of kerosene per week. But one of the things that's true of almost all the hydro projects is that the majority of the workers are actually subcontracted. Actual direct employment with any of these hydro projects is very, very low. So you're really talking about contracts and subcontracts, and the lowest worker actually, if he gets the minimum wage, that itself is a surprise. So we're talking about no fuel provision. Yeah. The reason I mention this is also that we talk about what is the pressure on the forests of Himachal. What we're looking at is the population density based on census data, based on some vague number that is not really on the ground. We're talking about the people who have property there, who are residents, who are registered as Himachalis. But this entire population actually needs forests, not only for cooking, but also for heating. It's an extremely cold place, and a lot of your migrant workers are actually coming from much warmer climates. So we're talking about intense demand on the forests, both seasonally for the tourist labor, but also in terms of 5-6 years in terms of large-scale projects. Okay, I need to wrap up here. So one of the things, these are the kind of the points I've already made, that in fact there's a transformation of the household economy that's that's actually neglected. There's a change in nature of forest and fuel use. Even people who are using it who are no longer necessarily very knowledgeable or actually doing it or having a relationship with nature. There's a shifting. So the embodied knowledge that's assumed in community-based resource management is no longer valid here. And the seasonal and short-term variations in population density, which places a direct pressure on the forest and the riverine system, is actually something that is not accounted anywhere at all. Yeah, and the last thing that I want to mention is, of course, the transformation in the nature of the community itself. Because I really want to leave you with the question of what is community? Is it the people who are living there and using those resources for 6 months or maybe even several years? Or is it really people who are not living there but who have an identity card and who have maybe property in that region? So, okay, I will. Okay, so in some sense, I want to link this up to climate change, mainly to talk about how the literature on climate change, at least, and if you look at the projects that are definitely there in Himachal, they actually fail to notice this relationship, the changing nature of the rural and the relationship between the rural and the urban, or between the local and the global. And I think that is a point that almost all the panelists have also made, that these things are really not distinct the way they are imagined, and I just want to connect it to the ecology of the region also. So, thank you.
Question for Dr. Vasan. So basically I've been working in Uttarakhand for the last 1 year now, and it was very interesting that how so many parallels could be drawn, as you also mentioned. So the interesting thing is, as you mentioned, about one of these villages being horticulture dependent. So what we noticed, out of the 12 hamlets that are in our study in Uttarakhand, the only hamlet that has managed to retain the male population within the hamlet itself is a horticultural village. And in fact, you have a more balanced gendered labor pattern also. So you also see men actually getting involved because of course money is involved versus traditional agriculture. So I was just curious if you think that Uttarakhand is kind of also moving, are they also kind of moving in this direction, because they are also again investing a lot in educating their children. So I don't know how that's going to turn out in maybe the next few generations.
Does that depend on the distinction between horticulture and agriculture? And finally, sorry I'm asking so many questions, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit to the contrast between your own two villages, because the presentation assumes a synthesis of.
Okay, this is not to any one panelist, but it was interesting that Anu, you spoke about this whole idea of uneven development and the fact that, you know, that the presence of poverty in certain areas is what drives national development in other areas. Now, my work is in one of the areas which is, you know, it should have been a source population. And what I've been noticing in that area, and I think that also came out from other Central India panel sort of presentations, is that, you know, this uneven development paradigm, the facts from our areas don't really fit in so neatly, in the sense that even within these regions, trajectories of accumulation are emerging, and yet you have, you know, people migrating to hill regions. So is it that, could it be? I don't know, perhaps also because one wants to see some signs of something going not so horribly wrong everywhere all the time. Could it be also that, you know, this accumulative kind of strategies are what are, you know, people from the tribal belts of Central India, Dumka, etc., are going to these regions as accumulative strategies, which then are giving them options which are greater than what is here. So I don't know, perhaps other panelists would also want to talk about this. Is it just that neat, this uneven development story?
My question is to Dr. Negi. Sir, fascinating presentation. I just wanted to ask you if you see signs of this critique against large dams and its detrimental impacts on ecologies taking on some kind of an organized form, protest, resistance at that level.
Maybe we can, perhaps if we have time, we can take another round of questions, but would you like to start? Yeah.
Yeah, so I think I agree with you that we cannot just look at uneven development. I thought that was one of the things I tried to argue, is that if you to look at, for example, spatial fix as a consequence of uneven development and as something that capitalism somehow just automatically facilitates as an abstract notion, then we miss out a lot on the micro narratives, which is what I kind of want to see. However, and also, for example, Dumka district, yes, uneven development, but the fact that it is one of the few districts of Jharkhand that has such a strong connection to the border roads also has a historical context, which is those dholkis that went there in the first place and somehow built that circuit already. However, I am not quite sure yet about the accumulative part in Dumka, because most of the people that I have spoken to so far have have not really managed to accumulate anything at all, even though that's the hope with which they go every year, that they will come back with some sort of an accumulated cash and be able to, I think somebody mentioned cell phone, buy a cell phone or a bike, or be able to pakka karo their house, or but they are quite deeply entrenched in often debts that they've already taken, or the debt that these mates generate on them or put on them, that really there are very, very few, very almost negligible success stories in terms of being able to accumulate wealth through this migratory process in this particular area. And that might change, we don't know. They've just built roads into those districts, and Dumka now since last year has its own railway station. So things might change, but at least in the past 30 years, there hasn't been that accumulation. People have been migrating for 30 years, 40 years in the same process.
Okay, I'll just start with a comment on that. I think, Asmita, generally I think when we say accumulative migration, you're thinking of people who have something to invest into it. So I would still think of Dumka as being distress migration. So when I'm talking about accumulative migration here, I'm talking about people who've made a surplus from some other source, agriculture, horticulture in this case, and then choose to invest it not back in horticulture, because that's not where your returns are, but invest it perhaps in the education of their children or in trade or in other sectors. So that, so I also think it's not quite, at least, but definitionally it's not accumulative migration, because I think it's often capital that allows you to, that you invest, that allows you to accumulate more capital. So, yeah. But the other comment that I wanted to make related to that is that what I also wanted to show that is that migration is not unilinear. So it's not only that people are migrating into Himachal or people are migrating out of Himachal, people are moving within Himachal. So one of the things that capitalism is doing is also increasing mobility. Yeah, and that is multidirectional, is what I wanted to point out. For the two questions, Ritu, I think whether male labor is retained in horticulture, both horticulture and cash crops, commercial agriculture, I think since they provide more returns, definitely retain some labor. So yes, I mean, compared to even a region in Himachal Pradesh where agriculture is not terribly productive, some of the lower districts are more, even parts of Mandi from where people are coming to Kullu. This region, in fact, because agriculture is able to produce a surplus, there are still people there. Again, connecting that to your question, I'm not suggesting that people are leaving agriculture. And I'm treating agriculture, horticulture, pastoralism as one, agriculture and allied sectors. And really people are moved for the most part from subsistence and I don't think you can call it subsistence anymore, self-use, home use agriculture and commercial agriculture. There's even still some home use. I mean, there are certain things that people do cultivate, you know, small scale, but that is reduced drastically in 20 years. I mean, there are no longer any large fields of rice or wheat or, you know, that is meant for local consumption. It's really meant for the market. Yeah, so, you know, I'm not making that distinction. I'm also not suggesting that people are abandoning agriculture and horticulture. I'm only saying agriculture as a sector can absorb only so much labor. So however good agriculture might be, it's successful. This is a district that is successful, that is good commercial agriculture, you know, returns are good. But even if the returns are good, how many members of the family do you actually need to sustain that? And how many skilled or educated members do you need? Often that's very, very little. Also land sizes are small. So what you have is one member of the family who's, you know, who's actually still managing whatever land and agriculture you have, and then you hire unskilled labor or semi-skilled labor. The rest of the family members are in fact looking for more productive uses of their labor. So that's a clarification. The contrast, yeah, that is, I think I didn't draw very much from my ethnography for this, simply because I was trying to make the larger picture and sort of connect it to the ecological aspect of it too for this panel. But the two, in fact, have moved in very different directions. And one of the biggest changes, of course, is that the peri-urban village is now very difficult to call it a village in any of the sort of classic definitions of a village. But the other is also that is a village that has been affected primarily by commercial agriculture and tourism. So the way the household economy diversification has happened is very different from the other village. The other village also has not remained unaffected, mainly because the large Parvati project is right down the road, and one of the tunnels that brings debris drastically transformed this village. There was 5 years of dust where agriculture was undoable. They got some compensation, but it's also odd that they imagine that people will go back to agriculture after 5-6 years. So 5-6 years, you have a generation of people who have to sustain through other things, and then you imagine that the project impact is now over and people will go back, and that hasn't happened. So they both change. These broader things I'm talking about is true of both. That's what I'm trying to say, yeah? But individually, yes, I think I can pull out a lot more in terms of, you know, the differences between the two. Thank you.
Like we discussed, the nature and pattern of development of dams in Himachal is very different from elsewhere. since they are built inside the mountain, there's hardly any visible sort of environmental destruction, or social costs are not sort of, they are not internalized by the communities, and then you hardly have any environmental destruction, visible environmental or rehabilitation issues. The only problem that we've ever had in Himachal was related to the Bhagra Nangal Dam, and the ousties from the Bhagra Nangal Dam are still not rehabilitated. It's been almost 50-60 years now. And in other areas where almost all these reservoirs or dams are made, it's if there is any sort of rehabilitation, it's only 5 or 6 families, and that is easy to handle for the administration. But now protests are happening, they are mobilizing, and they are garnering support from each other, learning from each other. For the past 2 or 3 years, this has been happening. There are some NGOs, a Himalayan Lok Niti Abhiyan has started. In Kinnaur, there are Nagrik Jagruk Manch. So localized people, and then there are people who are actually going there, like Narmada Bachao Andolan people went there, Vimal Bhai went there, and he organized people, told them about the problem is that people don't realize what is happening. It is only after a project has been implemented, because the discourse is such that it is for the national good. इससे आपका भला होगा, आपके यहाँ नौकरियाँ मिलेंगी, बिजली आएगी, पानी का अच्छा यूज़ होगा, ये पानी तो वेस्ट हो रहा है, इसका क्या फ़ायदा, टूरिज़म होगा, रोड बनेंगे. मतलब अगर मैं 20 साल से किन्नौर में ट्रैवल कर रहा हूँ, जब से मैं छोटा बच्चा था तब से मैं वहाँ जा रहा हूँ. वहाँ की रोड आज तक नहीं बनी है और ना ही बनने वाली है, क्योंकि वहाँ पर एक पहले प्रोजेक्ट आता है 30 मेगावाट का, उसके बाद वो 3000 मेगावाट का लाते हैं, उसके बाद वो 6000 मेगावाट का लाते हैं. सो मशीनरी के लिए जो आपको एक्सपेंशन चाहिए इन टर्म्स ऑफ द रोड, it will keep on, they will keep on breaking the road and making it again. So but now if you've heard of that ski village in Manali, for instance, which was being made by the Ford Motor Company, initially the Congress government gave it a go, okay, go and build it, and people didn't realize it that they were building a entire cottage based tourist based industry in the hill, entire hill, and all the water rights were also given to the Ford Motor Company, and they had intentions of bottling it right up. And Himalayan mountains are very, like, if you've heard of that water Evian, 100 grams of or 100 milliliters of it sells for around 300-400 rupees, and that's from the Alps. And we have much better glacial processes in the Himalayas because of the sheer scale. And later on, BJP government came in and said, no, this project will not happen. Then again, now the Congress government is there, so they said it will go ahead. But what people did was they had a very ingenious way of opposing the project. They invoked the local gods. Devi Devta system jo hota hai, which everybody in Himachal believes in. So you have your Gram Devta, you have your Kul Devta, and they invoke the gods, and they said, the god said through the gur that this project is environmentally destructive, it will destroy you. So everybody had to sort of fall in line, and even the politicians could not do anything, because then it became vote bank politics. So yeah, it's increasing now, different forms are coming out.
Actually, can I just maybe briefly add something? What in your presentation actually you pointed to in terms of political mobilization and scaling it up, what you pointed to was actually corruption at various scales of various kinds. So from the sand to the tipper, to which you didn't go into too much, was the licenses are set, are given at the state government level. So there's a whole ecosystem that is built at various levels, and where is an organization going to pitch itself at? Which level, which point? Perhaps that's where you go through the court sometime and try to take it that way.
Yeah, I was just going to point out the discussion about horticulture and agriculture. I think if you look, and I think that's, I mean, if you saw this sort of commercial agriculture in Congo, I think you'd see a very different thing. So.
And I think one thing, just a couple of very quick comments again. One thing that I hadn't imagined was this this overarching sort of issue of migration that sort of connects a lot of well, all the presentations. And one more thing is, in terms of agriculture, I think there's a research waiting to happen on perhaps PDS and the whole sort of gamut of things around PDS, public distribution, around gender, around meaning of food and what food counts, the value you put on certain sorts of food, and that, when it works, how it places these sort of disincentives on producing yourself. But then what does it do to the other sort of values and culture and so. So thanks so much to the panelists for this wonderful panel.